Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything right here on Sifted Games at Sifted.net. I love doing this show. I love that this is a great conduit between the two of us here, but we do need questions. So head over to Sifted.net. Look at the header. There's a link there where you can head to our forum so you can ask me questions. Again, you can ask me questions related to stuff that's going on right now. You can ask me questions that maybe I answer a few episodes from now. All of it is fair game. And again, I do love doing this show, and it happens because some of you guys are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/sifted. Now, to get all our content early, you only have to pledge $4 a month, but that $7 tier ensures that this show will keep happening and we can keep connecting. So it would be awesome if you could head over there and give us a pledge if you're watching this on YouTube. And a big thanks to our patrons who are already helping us make sure this happens. We have another great round of questions. Let's get to them. First up, we have a question from someone who asks a question in every episode, and that, of course, is Kevin. Tony Hawk has apparently talked to Activision about a new skating game. What would you want the next Tony Hawk game to be as an expert in both the skating and gaming industry? Well, the first thing I'll say, Kevin, is that I would not consider myself to be an expert on skateboarding now. If you want to talk about skateboarding in the 80s and 90s, sure. But I honestly, there's so many skaters now. There's so many board companies now, so many brands now. I can't keep up with them. I do watch a lot of skating on YouTube and stuff like that. I still do kind of have one toe in that pool. But calling me an expert in 2024 is a stretch. So I'm just going to say that right out of the gate. However, I do know what's up with skating. I mean, I still do understand the culture and how things happen and how the scene works and all that kind of stuff. So I have a little bit more insight maybe than your average games journalist. So the first thing I would say is yay. Thank God that they're working on another Tony Hawk game. It's been gone for way too long. Now, obviously, we just got the Tony Hawk 1 and 2 remasters. And Tony Hawk's actually talking about like the big anniversary for the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Now, they already remade the first two, so they can't do that again. So maybe it's going to be like remakes of the third and fourth. This is just me predicting. Do I think they're going to make a new Tony Hawk game from scratch? I'll be honest, I would be really surprised if that happens. But a boy can dream. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I've actually mentioned this before. I don't know if it was on Game Face or maybe on Invisible Walls back in the day. But I have had a dream skateboarding game for a really long time in the back of my mind that I wish that somebody would make. Now, as far as like the gameplay is concerned and things like that, I'm not going to be unrealistic and expect that they're going to completely dismantle the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater control scheme and change all that. They're not. And I think that would be stupid to do that, honestly. Like, all of us have built muscle memory to do like the revert after you land a trick so you can keep connecting your tricks together. They're not going to abandon that stuff, and I don't think that they should. I enjoy the style of gameplay in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, even though I am, or was at least, a real skater. So it doesn't have to be hyper-realistic like the Skate franchise, which we're still waiting on. What I want more is how the things happen in between the skating. That's what I want to see change, because there is a culture around skateboarding. Some would say it's bad, some would say it's good. I would say it's both as somebody who lived in it, but it's there. And that culture has never been represented in a skateboarding video game. It just never has. And what I'm talking about is how being a skater actually works. If you're really into skating, you skate every day. You find time every day to go skating. And if you're really into it, you skate pretty much all day if you can. The sport is so difficult, that's the only way you'll ever get good. I'm not kidding. You need to skate 8 hours a day, as many days a week as you can, or you're never going to be learning new tricks and things like that. So the first thing is that they need to establish that skating is like this daily thing. And then they need to show you how that works. How you start calling your crew of skate friends to figure out where you're going to meet, who's going to be able to make it, who has to work, who doesn't have to work, and then the spot that we're going to go to. And that has never been represented in a skateboarding video game. So you figure it out, and it used to be back then we were calling each other on landlines or whatever. Now you have cell phones to make it easier. But you call each other, you organize at someone's house, then you all pile into maybe one car or two cars, and then you go to the spot and you skate. And then you skate there for a couple hours. Stuff happens while you're there. Cops show up, they try to throw you out. Angry citizens mess with you. There's this whole other life to skateboarding outside of the actual skating. So you get to the spot, you skate it for a while, maybe you get thrown out, Then you start talking to your buddies, like, okay, where are we going to go next? And it almost turns into like an election, so to speak, where everyone's like, well, I want to go to this ditch, or let's go over to Bill's ramp, or no, let's go skate this really awesome curb over at this school. And you sit there and you figure it out, and then you go to the next spot. And then maybe after you finish at that spot, you're like, well, hey, we wanted to go to Bill's ramp earlier. Let's go to Bill's ramp. Give him a call. Let's see if we can come over. That whole part of skateboarding has never been represented. And then at nighttime, after you're done skating, well, maybe you go to like an indoor ramp to skate, or you go to a curb that's well lit at night that you can skate at, or you go out and you party. All of this stuff has never been represented in any skateboarding games. Like Tony Hawk has, like, you show up at the spot and there's like some other skaters that are like, yo, brah, what you doing? Let's skate, brah. Yeah, let's skate, brah. Let's go skate. Like, that's been the extent of it. Like, I want to play like a GTA set in skate culture. That's what I'm looking for. And how awesome it would be if it really did have an open city where you could skate in between spots and get the spots. The cultural side of skateboarding has never been represented in video games, and it is way overdue. Okay, next up we have a question from the Sandman. Why is driving so bad in LA? What can be done to change it? Oh, Sandman, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a very, very wealthy man, because believe me, there are a lot of really, really smart people who are trying to figure that out and who have tried to figure that out for a really long time. But really the root of the problem, and this may sound silly to use this as the example of what the problem is that it's a driving city. I know you're like, well, you're trying to not make it a driving city. And I'll get to that, how we can not make it a driving city. But for decades, LA has been a driving city. My apartment, where I live, in fact, where I'm sitting right now, we are 100 yards away from the 405. In fact, here's the view outside the window of the office that I work in, the spare bedroom I work in, every single day. We are literally just like 100 feet away from probably the biggest interstate in the entire United States. It is like 6 or 8 lanes each direction, and it is always full. I know that is mind-boggling, that it's even possible to fill up that many lanes with cars pretty much all day long. And it is pretty much all day long. From, I don't know, like 6:30 or 7 until like 7 or 8 o'clock at night during the week. And then on the weekends, it's busy until like 9:30 or 10 as people go out to have dinner on Friday night or go out clubbing on Saturdays or whatever. The 405 is always rocking. So, and then we have the 10 freeway, which goes east and west, and that's 6 or 7 lanes each direction. And that's the highway that goes downtown and goes to the beach, and that's always full. And the solution really, and the problem really, is that LA has traditionally had horrible public transit. Now I'll say this, the bus system here, if you can figure it out, it will kind of take you pretty much anywhere you want to go. It may take a really long time. You may have to change buses a few times. But if you learn the system, you really can get around the city using the bus system. But most people just don't want to do it because it is a pain in the butt and it takes forever. So people drive instead. So really the solution is a better train system. And over the last 10 years, LA has worked really hard on the train systems here. In fact, they just built one that's running from basically where I live right now all the way down to the beaches and all the way downtown. So it's kind of running along where the 10 freeway is. So we still need a route that goes north and south that's reliable. There's one, but it's small and it doesn't really do what it needs to do. So really, LA needs to up its train game, or its subway, or its elevated train game, so to speak. The Olympics are going to be here in a couple years, and they're doing a ton of stuff, like at the airport right now, trying to get the airport ready for the Olympics. And that other train line that I talked about, going north and south, that's also supposed to be done before the Olympics. They're building another line on Wilshire, so it feels like LA is figuring it out. Now, during the pandemic, it was insane to look out the window and see no one on the 405. It was literally eerie to see. And it did take a little while for the traffic to return after COVID, but I'll just say this. I think it's actually worse now than it's ever been. And I don't know if it's COVID, people like just don't want to be around other people who may be carrying the virus. I don't know why, but traffic now is just as bad, if not worse, as it's always been. So I think LA isn't an anomaly. I think this is the answer to traffic problems pretty much everywhere, is better public transit. And I think if you're somebody who ever travels to Europe, you see what good public transit is, and you wonder why in the hell we don't have it here. for whatever reason, America has this fascination with the automobile. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's bad for the environment and it's bad for traffic. So I think also there needs to be a cultural shift inside the minds of the average, or inside the mind of the average American, where taking a train is okay. Like, once they get high-speed trains, like a line that goes all the way from, let's say, like Boston down to like Miami or something on the eastern seaboard, I think once that happens and a lot of people start riding it, public perception will start to change. But right now, America kind of feels like it's left back in like the Stone Age as far as transportation is concerned. Okay, next up, we have a question from Commander Fett. Hey Shane, hope you are doing well. I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for asking, Commander Fett. There's been a lot of hate towards Star Wars Outlaws' implementation of stealth. Having played the game, I don't think it's as egregious as everyone has made it out to be, but do you think if they had made the stealth more open-ended and not instant fail, it would sell more copies? Or do you think that people were ready to hate on the game and this was a perfect excuse to dogpile? Well, I shared a little bit of my feelings about this on Game Face this last episode, 402. So did Matt. But I really didn't touch on this that much. Matt did. Because we were talking about how the team at Ubisoft is getting rid of the instant fail stealth missions, at least in the early part of the game. Do I think that will help? Yes. As far as like people who are going to give it a chance. Is it going to convince people who are turned off to the game due to the reviews to reconsider and give it a chance? Probably not. I mean, it could be a case where you have, like with Cyberpunk 2077, where they don't give up and eventually they make it an incredible game and it actually becomes like a story that people are talking about. Like, wow, this is something that we never thought was possible. A game that bombed can be turned into a success. That story's already kind of been written now. So I don't even know if that would happen for Star Wars Outlaws, honestly. I just really think the bigger problem was the initial reviews. And I don't think the game is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, you saw my my impressions of it on Game Face over the last couple episodes. But I do think that, for whatever reason, the reviews for that game are too low. And I know Matt still says he sticks by a 7 or 7.5. I didn't even check its Metacritic lately to see where it is at this point. Maybe it has come up a little bit. But the initial round of reviews, I thought the scores were too low. And again, I'm not arguing that the game is perfect. I just think the game still has value. Even if you don't like the stealth stuff, which it didn't bother me as much as, even as Matt, honestly. It really bothered him more than it bothered me. And it definitely didn't bother me as much as some of the people who gave this game like a 4 out of 10 or whatever, which is just insane. But it still bothered me, and it affected my impressions of the game generally. But I just don't think it's like a deal breaker. I do think that Ubisoft sold the potential audience for this game a little short. I do think a lot of the decisions that were made in the game were made thinking that the game was going to be purchased by more casual players and not necessarily the audience that is on Sifted every day, so to speak. And I think that was a mistake. I think the general audience is perfectly capable of handling one of Ubisoft's traditional open-world action RPG games. Like, they play Assassin's Creed. Why couldn't they play a Star Wars game that's like Assassin's Creed? And I do think that that's what's happened here. And at the same time, I do think there's a lot of value in this game for Star Wars fans. If you are a big-time Star Wars fan, spending $70 to walk around in a Star Wars world for 40 hours is worth the $70. And I feel like a lot of people lost that when they did their evaluations of the game. And you can do that while also pointing out all the faults that the game has that I also agree with. So, do I think there was piling on? No. I think maybe what we're starting to see is the next generation of game reviewers kind of starting to take over as far as like the bulk of review scores are concerned. So people like me are now the minority, and we don't contribute our reviews to Metacritic or anything anyway. We're still the minority. Like, we're not the bulk of the opinion on game reviews anymore. It's the younger set. It's the 20 to 35-year-old people who maybe don't like Star Wars like we do. We lived through the original trilogy, which was just this thing that I don't think people who didn't will ever understand. I just don't think they'll get it. Like, how big of a deal Star Wars was when we were young kids and growing up. It just hasn't hit like that for these other generations. The second trilogy of movies wasn't great. And then this last run of movies, some of them were pretty good. Some of them were not quite as good. There's just not this affinity for Star Wars among this younger generation of game reviewers. They're not giving it a Star Wars bump, so to speak. And I don't think that they should. However, I think that they fail to see the value in the game to people that they don't know or understand. And so you look at some of these reviews, the 4s out of 10s, the 5s out of 10s. First of all, whether you like Star Wars or not, to me that is insane. When you look at some of the other games they gave those scores to, it is even more insane. But at the same time, I am willing to recognize that the game does have faults. So as far as dogpiling on, like, I don't think it was dogpiling. I just think that a lot of the people reviewing games anymore just don't have an affinity for Star Wars like a lot of the older players do. So I don't think that that was it. As far as the actual stealth missions are concerned, I think it was just a mistake to make the game a stealth game, period. I think that was just a colossal mistake. The game should have been a third-person shooter with some light stealth elements here and there, like a couple missions where you had to sneak in and do stuff. Not the whole crux of the game. That is so, like, 2005. Like, there just aren't stealth games anymore for a reason. And it's mind-boggling to me that Ubisoft missed how to handle the Star Wars angle with fans and assuming that players are less evolved than they really are. Ubisoft just dropped the ball a lot here. Now, not forgetting that Lucas has a heavy hand in anything related to Star Wars, and they could have totally helped screw it up as well. So, I think it's a shame that such a small group of people are going to play Star Wars Outlaws compared to who should play it. It should have a lot more players than it has right now. I also feel bad for Star Wars fans who maybe were turned off of this game because of the reviews, because I do think that if they play this game, they will be giddy, just like I was. Any hardcore Star Wars fan, there's so many moments in this game where you're like, damn, I've been waiting for this for a long time. And I feel like the aggregate review scores and some of the verbiage in these reviews has turned these people off. So, do I think Star Wars Outlaws has got what it deserves? No. Do I think it's perfect? No. Do I think the reviewers were dogpiling on and they looked at it as a chance to maybe put out some clickbait? No, I think they were honestly just giving their honest impressions, but they just have a completely different perspective from the older players and the older Star Wars fans. Okay, our last question for this week's episode comes from Red Fox. Why do you think Lightgun games aren't a thing anymore? I played the heck out of Time Crisis 1 and 2 on the PlayStation on a small TV screen. I think a big-budget Lightgun game with new ideas would be awesome. People still pay for them in the arcades. They're one of the last moneymakers besides racing games or crappy ticket games. Do you think it would sell? So Red Fox, as a big fan of Lightgun games, I'm surprised that you haven't picked up on the fact that for a little while there, game developers and publishers were trying to revive them. Particularly during the Wii era, where you had the Wiimote, which was a perfect Lightgun replicator where you could point at the screen and shoot. And we just recently had the House of the Dead remake that was available for Switch. They're putting them out. People aren't buying them. People just don't care. I think the Lightgun game was a stopgap before the first-person shooter. I think it was the way that game developers figured out how to make shooters before they actually figured out first-person shooters. And Lightgun games were the best way to do that. And there was always a barrier of entry there because on the old consoles, a lot of times they would come packed in with a gun, but you had to make sure you had a light gun to just play the games. And again, a lot of times they would come packed in, but not every time. And so you had to make sure you had the gun, and you would only use it once every couple years, and like you'd go to use it and you'd be missing a cord or whatever. It was always a thing to play light gun games. Now it should be easier now because we have Wiimotes and we have the Joy-Con controllers for Switch that are just basically light gun peripherals right out of the box. But people have just rejected these games. Like, pretty much all the light gun games from the last, 10 years have not done well. And some of them had pretty big budgets. Some of them were based on some pretty big IP. A couple of those Switch ones, in particular, were based on big IP. And people just don't care, Red Fox. I'm sorry to tell you. It's just one of those genres that's just going to remain niche. And again, it doesn't help that on every platform but Switch, you're going to have to probably buy some extra gun peripheral. I mean, most controllers do have gyro, at least the DualSense does. But if you want to play like a light gun game like that, no, you want a gun. And that's a barrier to entry for both the publisher and the developer, and extra cost, and it's a barrier to entry to the player. I think really it's more of a function of practicality. And I think that's why, as you say, when you go to the arcade, there's still light gun games there and people play them. because the barrier to entry isn't there. The arcade has handled all the nonsense. You just have to put in your card and play. And I think that's when it works. But again, it doesn't work so much in the home environment. So I hear you, Red Fox. I also come from the time when light gun games were a huge deal, and you would go into an arcade and play Time Crisis with your buddy and spend like $15 trying to finish it. I remember all of that stuff, and I do have an affinity for it and a fond memory of it, but apparently we are in the minority. Okay, that will do it for this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything. Once again, I want to thank all our patrons for supporting Sifted at patreon.com/Sifted. Again, for just $4 a month, you get all our content early. You get this show, the video version, like 5 days early. You get Pactor Factor a week early. You get Game Face 4 days early. And again, that's just for $4 a month. But if you really like this show, and you want to make sure this show keeps happening, then bump that pledge up to $7 or more per month. We have so many people hitting at that tier. That's exactly why this show keeps happening. And I love doing it as well. So thanks for your support, patrons. People on YouTube, please consider supporting us. It would be awesome. We'd really appreciate it. Again, we do try to place a bigger emphasis on our patrons. We give a bigger gap between when our patrons get content and we release it for free. And I realize if you're on YouTube, that's a pain. Also, if you don't like ads in content, if you're a patron, you don't have to watch ads in Game Face or Pactor Factor. There are huge advantages to becoming a patron. It would be awesome if you consider it. Thanks to everybody who did ask questions for this episode. Don't forget to go ask more for next week. We'll see you next time. Have yourself an awesome weekend full of awesome video games.